In the sleepy village of Broadhinny, a nosy charwoman, Mrs. McGinty, is brutally murdered. Her lodger convicted, but the truth lies hidden in a decades-old secret. Hercule Poirot, with his razor-sharp mind, arrives to unravel a web of deception. A torn newspaper clipping about a past crime, a mysterious photograph, and a second poisoning death point to a killer desperate to bury their identity. As Poirot sets a cunning trap, fear grips the village's respectable households. Will he expose the murderer before another life is lost? Dive into a classic Agatha Christie mystery where every smile hides a secret. Chapter 1. The death of a charwoman. The rain fell in a dreary patter over the cobbled streets of London, casting a grey pallor over the city as Hercule Poirot sat in his elegant flat, the fire crackling softly in the grate. His meticulously arranged desk, with its polished pens and neatly stacked papers, reflected the order of his mind, a mind that, at this moment, was restless. Retirement, though chosen, sat uneasily upon him. The great Hercule Poirot, whose little grey cells had unravelled the most intricate crimes, found himself idling, his days filled with trivialities. He sipped his tisane, the delicate aroma failing to soothe his ennui, when a knock at the door broke the silence. "Entrez," Poirot called, adjusting his immaculate tie. His valet, George, ushered in a sturdy, middle-aged man with a weathered face and a demeanour that bespoke quiet authority. Superintendent Spence, of the Kilchester Police, removed his damp hat and offered a respectful nod. "Monsieur Poirot," Spence began, his voice gruff but deferential, "I hope I'm not intruding. I've a case that's troubling me, and I thought, well, your reputation precedes you." Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden interest, his moustache twitching slightly. "A case, you say? Pray, sit, and tell me all." The mind of Hercule Poirot is at your service. Spence settled into a chair, his hands clasped tightly as if to steady his thoughts. "It's a murder, sir, in a village called Broadhinny. A charwoman, Mrs. McGinty, was found dead in her cottage 3 weeks ago, skull bashed in, blood on the floorboards, and a small sum of money, £30, to be exact, missing from her tin box. We've arrested her lodger, James Bentley, and he's been convicted. Trial's done, sentence passed. But," Spence hesitated, his brow furrowing, "I'm not satisfied." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Not satisfied, mon ami? This is most interesting. Why do you doubt?" Spence shifted uncomfortably. "It's too neat, Mr. Poirot. Bentley's a queer sort, nervous, unemployed, no spine to speak of. He lived with Mrs. McGinty, paid her rent, but they quarrelled often. She nagged him about his untidiness, his lack of work. The night she died, neighbours heard raised voices. Next morning, she's dead, and we find blood on Bentley's sleeve. He claims he found her body and panicked, but his story's vague. No alibi, no explanation for the money. The jury didn't hesitate. And yet, you hesitate," Poirot murmured, his green eyes narrowing. "What is it that disturbs you, Superintendent?" Spence rubbed his jaw. "Mrs. McGinty was a hard-working woman, sir. Cleaned houses for half the village respectable folk, mostly. She was nosy, mind you, always poking into corners, noticing things. I can't shake the feeling she saw something she shouldn't have. And Bentley, well, he's not the sort to plan a murder. He's weak, not wicked. The crime feels calculated, somehow, not like a desperate man lashing out." Poirot nodded slowly, his mind already turning. "This Mrs. McGinty, what manner of woman was she?" Describe her, if you please. Widow, late 50s, sturdy build, Spence replied. Lived simply, saved every penny. No enemies, far as we know, but she had a sharp tongue. Her cottage was small, cluttered with old newspapers and knickknacks. We found something odd. The torn bit of newspaper, an article from years back about a murder case. Didn't seem like something she'd keep, but it was hidden under her floorboard. A newspaper article. Poirot's voice sharpened. Of what nature? Some old scandal, a young woman convicted of killing her aunt. Sensational stuff, but decades old. I can't see why it mattered to Mrs. McGinty, unless... Spence trailed off, shaking his head. That's why I'm here, sir. I don't want an innocent man hanged, but I've no evidence to overturn the verdict. The chief constable's satisfied, but I thought you might see what I'm missing. Poirot rose, his small frame radiating purpose. You were wise to come, Superintendent. The little grey cells, they are stirred. This case, it has the scent of something hidden, something that does not wish to be found. I shall go to Broadhinny myself and observe this village, these people. If there is a truth beneath the surface, Hercule Poirot will uncover it. Face softened with relief. I knew you'd take it on, sir. I'll arrange for you to stay at the Three Ducks Inn. Quiet place, good for watching folk. But be careful, someone in Broadhinny's clever, and they've killed once. Poirot smiled faintly, his confidence unshaken. Cleverness, Superintendent, is no match for method. I shall be discreet, a mere visitor to your village. And now, tell me more of this James Bentley and the scene of the crime. As Spence recounted the details, the ransacked cottage, the missing sugar hammer, the blood-stained floorboard, Poirot listened intently, his mind weaving a tapestry of possibilities. A charwoman dead, a lodger condemned, and a village hiding. Secrets, the game, as his old friend Hastings might say, was afoot. Chapter 2. Arrival in Broadhinid. Train to Broadhinage rattled through the damp English countryside, its wheels clacking a monotonous rhythm that did little to soothe Hercule Poirot's restless mind. He sat in a first-class carriage, his gloved hands folded neatly over the silver handle of his walking stick, his eyes fixed on the blurred green fields beyond the window. The drizzle had ceased, but a heavy mist clung to the landscape, shrouding the distant hills in a veil of mystery. Poirot, ever attuned to atmosphere, felt the weight of secrets in this unassuming corner of England. Broadhinny Superintendent, Spence had assured him, was a village of quiet respectability, yet the murder of Mrs. McGinty suggested otherwise. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with anticipation. He had chosen his attire with care. A sober black suit, a crisp white shirt, and a meticulously knotted tie, all calculated to present the image of a fastidious foreign gentleman, perhaps a retired scholar or a minor diplomat seeking rural repose. His moustache, waxed to perfection, gleamed under the carriage's dim light. To the casual observer, he was merely an eccentric visitor, but beneath this facade, Poirot's mind was sharp, his purpose clear. He would observe, listen, and unravel the truth hidden in Broadhinny's orderly lanes. The train slowed, and the platform at Broadhinny station came into view, a small, weathered structure with a single bench and a faded sign. Poirot disembarked, his polished shoes clicking on the wet stone. A porter, a lanky youth with a sullen expression, took his suitcase without a word, leading him to a waiting taxi. The driver, a ruddy-faced man named Tompkins, greeted him with a nod. "Three Ducks Inn, is it, sir?" he asked, his voice thick with the local burr. "Oui, Precisement, Poirot replied, settling into the creaking seat. As the taxi trundled through the village, he studied his surroundings. Broad Hinny was a picture of rural England, thatched cottages with tidy gardens, a stone church with a lopsided steeple, and a high street boasting a post office, a butcher's shop, and a tea room, with lace curtains. Yet there was a stillness, a watchfulness, as if the village held its breath. Poirot noted the curtains twitching in a window, the quick glance of a woman hurrying past with a basket. Secrets, he thought, are never far from such places. The three Duxton stood at the edge of the village, a low, ivy-covered building with a sagging roof and a sign depicting three improbably cheerful ducks. Inside, the air was warm, scented with wood smoke and ale. The landlady, Mrs. Sweetyman, a stout woman with a brisk manner and sharp eyes, greeted Poirot with a mixture of curiosity and deference. "Mr. Poirot, is it? We've your room ready, sir. Not often we get visitors from abroad. Come for the country air, have you?" Poirot inclined his head, his smile polite but guarded. "Indeed, madame, I seek the tranquillity of your charming village, a place, I am told, of great peace." Mrs. Sweetyman's lips twitched, as if she sensed irony. "Peaceful enough, sir, except for poor Mrs. McGinty's business. Shocked us all, that did. But you'll find Broad Hinny a decent place, long as you don't mind the gossip." "Gossip, madame." Poirot's tone was light, but his eyes gleamed. "I find it most instructive, the voice of a village. It reveals much." She chuckled, leading him up a narrow staircase to a small but spotless room overlooking the village. "Green, you'll hear plenty at the bar, sir. Mind you, don't take it all to heart." Left alone, Poirot unpacked with methodical care, arranging his toiletries in precise rows. He opened the window, letting in the damp air, and surveyed the green below. A group of children played near the duck pond, their laughter muted by the mist. Beyond, a woman in a tweed coat hurried toward the post office, her head bowed against the wind. Poirot's gaze lingered. Every gesture, every glance, was a thread in a tapestry he would weave. That evening, he descended to the inn's bar, a cosy room with low beams and a crackling fire. The locals, a mix of farmers, shopkeepers, and a few well-dressed gentry, eyed him with mild curiosity. Poirot ordered a glass of sherry regrettably inferior, but he sipped it with grace and settled at a corner table, his ears attuned to the hum of conversation. The murder of Mrs. McGinty, it seemed, was still a topic of fervent discussion. Poor old soul, a grizzled man in a flat cap muttered to his companion. "Didn't deserve that, not for £30. That Bentley, he's a bad unmarked." "My words, queer fish, that one," the other replied, nursing a pint. "Always skulking about, no job, no prospects. Reckon he snapped when she nagged him one time too many." Poirot's lips curved faintly. Public opinion, he knew, was often a distortion of truth, yet it provided a starting point. He rose, approaching the bar with an air of amiable curiosity. "Pardon, messieurs," he said, addressing the two men. "I could not help but overhear this tragedy of Madame McGinty. It is most shocking. Was she well regarded in the village?" The men exchanged glances, surprised by the foreigners. Interest. The grizzled one, introducing himself as Fred Abbott, a local farmer, nodded. "Aye, she was a good sort, Mrs. McGinty, hard worker, cleaned for half the big houses hereabouts. Bit nosy, mind, always poking into folks' business, but no harm." "In her, no harm," echoed the other, a butcher named Sid Cole, "till someone bashed her head in that is. Police got the right man, though. Bentleys for the gallows, and good riddance. Poirot tilted his head, his expression one of polite concern. And yet, such a crime in so quiet a place. It is curious, Nan. Were there no others who might have wished her ill? Abbot snorted. Not likely. Mrs. McGinty kept to herself, mostly. Cleaned for the Upwards, the Rendals, the Carpenters, and them Weatherbys. All respectable folk. No call for murder there. Poirot filed the names away, his mind already categorizing the households. These families, they are prominent in Broadhinny. Oh, aye, Cole said. Mrs. Upwards, the Queen Bee, lives up at Laburnum Cottage with her son, Robin. He's a writer, fancies himself a genius. Then there's Dr. Rendal and his missus, Eve nice enough, but she's a nervy sort. The Carpenters are new money, guys aiming for Parliament. And his wife Maud, she's a looker but sharp as a tack. Weatherbys are old family, bit down. On their luck, with a daughter, Deirdre, quiet as a mouse. Poirot nodded, his smile encouraging. Most interesting. And this Madame McGinty, she worked for them all. She must have known their habits, their secrets, perhaps. Abbott's eyes narrowed slightly, but he shrugged. Reckon she did. Always chattering about what she saw in folks' houses, left out, that sort of thing. But nothing to kill for, surely. Beans, sir, Poirot murmured, retreating to his table. The conversation had confirmed what Spence suspected. Mrs. McGinty's nosiness was key. Her work in the village's grander homes placed her in a position to observe, to uncover. The newspaper clipping Spence mentioned, a relic of a past crime, suggested. She had stumbled upon something dangerous, but what and who? The following morning, Poirot set out to explore Broadhinny, his walking stick tapping a steady rhythm on the cobbled paths. The mist had lifted, revealing a village of deceptive charm. He passed the church, where the vicar, a thin man with a distracted air, was tending rose bushes. Poirot greeted him with a bow, introducing himself as a visitor interested in local history. The vicar, Mr. Scuttle, was eager to talk, lamenting the decline of village traditions, but offering little about Mrs. McGinty beyond vague praise for her diligence. At the post office, Poirot encountered the postmistress, Miss Birch, a wiry woman, with a penchant for gossip. Under the pretense of buying stamps, he steered the conversation to the murder. A terrible affair, he said, shaking his head. This Madame McGinty, she was known to you. Miss Birch's eyes gleamed with the thrill of scandal. Oh yes, sir, came in regular. She did. 2 post letters or buy a bit of stationery. Always full of chatter about the houses she cleaned. Said Mrs. Upward was forever hosting theatricals. And Dr. Rendal's wife was jumpy as a cat. Once told me she found something peculiar in one of the houses, but wouldn't say what. Next thing you know, she's dead. Poirot's pulse quickened, but he kept his tone mild. Peculiar, you say? How intriguing. Did she mention which house? Miss Birch frowned, thinking. Not, as I recall, could have been any of Emtha, Upwards, Rendals, Carpenters, or Weatherbys. She was in and out of 'em all. Mind you, she was one to exaggerate, so I didn't pay much heed. Notarel Mong Poirot said, pocketing his stamps. You have been most helpful, mademoiselle. His next stop was the High Street, where he lingered outside the tea-room, observing the comings and goings. A tall, elegant woman emerged, her auburn hair pinned beneath a stylish hat. She moved with confidence, her tailored coat accentuating her poise. Poirot recognized her from Cole's description. Maud Carpenter, wife of the ambitious Guy Carpenter. He tipped his hat as she passed, noting the sharp glance she cast his way, not hostile, but appraising. A woman, he thought, who misses little. Further along, he spotted a younger woman, plain and dowdy, carrying a heavy basket. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes fixed on the ground. This, he deduced, was Deirdre Henderson, the Weatherby's daughter. Her air of quiet resignation intrigued him. Had Mrs. McGinty's chatter reached her ears? Did she, too, know of something peculiar? By noon, Poirot had formed a mental map of Broadhinny's social landscape. The village was small, its inhabitants interconnected, yet beneath the surface lay currents of unease. He returned to the Three Ducks for lunch, where Mrs. Sweetyman served him a passable shepherd's pie. As he ate, a new figure entered the bar, a man in his 30s, slight and animated, with a colourful scarf and an expressive face. Robin Upward, Poirot guessed, the playwright's son of Mrs. Upward. Robin greeted the room with a theatrical wave, his voice carrying a practised charm. "Afternoon, all," he called, then spotted Poirot. "Well, now, who's this? A new face in our rustic paradise." Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Hercule Poirot, monsieur, a visitor to your charming village." Robin's eyes sparkled with interest. "A Belgian, no less. Mother will be delighted. She adores anything continental. You must come to one of her soirees. I'm Robin Upward, by the way, scribbler of plays and general ne'er-do-well." Poirot smiled, sensing an opportunity. "I should be honoured. Monsieur Upward, your mother, she is a patron of the arts." "Oh, mother's the queen of amateur dramatics," Robin said, settling at Poirot's table uninvited. "She's got half the village roped into her latest production. Even poor Mrs. McGinty used to help with the costumes, bless her soul." Poirot's ears pricked up. "Madame McGinty worked for your household?" "Indeed she did," Robin replied, his tone light but his eyes watchful. "Scrubbed our floors and gossiped like nobody's business. Terrible what happened to her. Makes one wonder who's next." There was a hint of flippancy in his words, but Poirot detected an undercurrent of unease. He probed gently, asking about the villagers' mood after the murder, but Robin deflected with anecdotes about his plays. Poirot let the matter drop, knowing patience would yield more than pressure. As evening fell, Poirot retired to his room, his mind a whirl of impressions. Broadhinny was a stage, its players hiding behind masks of respectability. Mrs. McGinty, with her dustpan and gossip, had seen something or someone that cost her life. The newspaper clipping, tucked away like a guilty secret, pointed to a past crime, perhaps a past identity. Poirot stood at his window, gazing at the darkened village. Somewhere among these neat cottages, a killer moved, confident in their disguise. But Hercule Poirot, with his method and his little grey cells, would strip that disguise away. Chapter 3. The Lodger's Tale. The morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds over Broadhinny, casting a pallid light on the village as Hercule Poirot made his way to the Kilchester police station. The air was sharp with the promise of autumn, and he drew his overcoat tighter, his walking stick tapping a precise rhythm on the uneven pavement. His mind, however, was far from the chill. It buzzed with the details of Mrs. McGinty's murder, the newspaper clipping, and the villagers. Undercurrents of secrecy. Superintendent Spence had arranged for Poirot to interview James Bentley, the convicted lodger, and Poirot anticipated that this meeting would illuminate the character of the man at the heart of the case, or Perhaps its scapegoat. The police station, a squat brick building with a peeling sign, stood at the edge of Kilchester, a market town some miles from Broadhine. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper and stale tea. Spence greeted Poirot with a firm handshake, his face lined with the strain of a man wrestling with doubt. "Glad you're here, Mr. Poirot," he said, leading him down a dim corridor. "Bentley's waiting. He's not much for talking, but you've a way of getting at the truth." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes gleaming with quiet confidence. "The truth, mon ami, is like a pearl in an oyster. It requires patience to extract, but it is there. Let us see what Monsieur Bentley reveals." They entered a small, bare room, with a single barred window. James Bentley sat at a scarred wooden table, his thin frame hunched, his hands fidgeting with the frayed cuffs of his jacket. He was younger than Poirot had expected, perhaps 30, with pale skin, lank brown hair, and eyes that darted nervously, as if expecting rebuke. His clothes, though clean, were worn, and his posture suggested a man accustomed to defeat. Poirot noted the absence of menace in his demeanour. Bentley seemed more like a frightened boy than a murderer. "Bonjour, Monsieur Bentley," Poirot said, seating himself opposite with a courteous nod. "I am Hercule Poirot, a visitor to Broadhine. I am here to understand the circumstances of Madame McGinty's death. You will speak with me, yes?" Bentley's eyes flicked to Spence, then back to Poirot. His voice, when it came, was low and halting. I don't know what more I can say. They've already decided I did it. The trial's over." Poirot's smile was gentle, disarming, and yet, "Here I am, monsieur. The verdict of a jury is one thing, the truth is another. Tell me of your life with Madame McGinty. What manner of woman was she to you?" Bentley swallowed, his fingers twisting a loose thread on his sleeve. "She was strict, always tidying up after me, telling me to keep my room neat. Said I was a burden, what with no job. But she wasn't cruel. She'd bring me tea sometimes, or a bit of cake. Just fussy, you know. Always on about her work, the houses she cleaned." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but probing. "And these houses, she spoke of them, of the people she worked for?" "Sometimes," Bentley said, his gaze dropping to the table. "She'd go on about Mrs. Upwood's plays, or how Dr. Rendell's wife was always jumpy. Said the Carpenters had fancy things, but Mr. Carpenter was cross about mess. She liked to talk, Mrs. McGinty. I didn't always listen." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. "And did she ever speak of finding something unusual? A paper, perhaps, or an object that puzzled her?" Bentley frowned, his brow creasing as he thought. "Once, maybe, a few weeks before it happened, she came back from work all excited, said she'd found something that set her thinking. Wouldn't tell me what, just said it was a turn-up for the books. I thought she was just being nosy, like always." Poirot exchanged a glance with Spence, who stood by the door, his face impassive but his eyes alert. The newspaper clipping, Poirot thought, was no mere keepsake. Mrs. McGinty had recognized its significance, and it had cost her life. This excitement, Poirot continued. Did it change her behavior? Did she seem afraid or secretive? Bentley shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not afraid, just smug, I suppose, like she knew something important. But I didn't care much. I was trying to find work, and she kept nagging about the rent. We argued that night the night she died. I told her I'd pay when I could, and she said I was useless. I went to my room, and that's the last I saw her." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the next morning, you found her, oui." Bentley's hands trembled, and he pressed them flat against the table. I went downstairs about 7. She was on the floor in the parlor, blood everywhere, her head. I didn't know what to do. I touched her to see if she was alive, but she was cold. I got blood on my sleeve, and I just stood there till the postman came by and saw me through the window. He fetched the police." Poirot studied the young man's face, noting the pallor, the beads of sweat on his forehead. Fear, yes, but guilt, that was less certain. And the money, Monsieur Bentley, the £30 missing from her tin box. "I didn't take it." Bentley's voice rose, cracking with desperation. "I swear I didn't. I know how it looks, but I never touched her money. I wouldn't, I couldn't." Poirot raised a hand, calming him. "Tranquil, monsieur. Let us consider the scene. The room, it was disturbed. Things out of place." Bentley nodded slowly. "Yes, drawers pulled out, papers scattered. Her tin box was open, the money gone. They said I did it to make it look like a robbery, but I didn't. I swear it." Poirot sat back, his fingers steepled, his mind sifting through the details. The ransacked room, the missing sugar hammer, the blood on Bentley's sleeve pointed to a hasty crime, yet Spencer's unease suggested otherwise. The scene felt staged, the chaos too deliberate, and the clipping, hidden under a floorboard, hinted at a deeper motive. Bentley, with his nervous manner and lack of guile, seemed an unlikely architect of such deception. "Tell me, Monsieur Bentley," Poirot said, his tone conversational, "did Madame McGinty ever mention a newspaper article, perhaps one from many years ago?" Bentley's eyes widened slightly, as if the question surprised him. "Not exactly. She liked old papers, kept stacks of them, said they were good for kindling, but she never mentioned anything special." "Why?" Poirot smiled, enigmatically. "A small matter, perhaps. One final question. Did anyone visit Madame McGinty in the days before her death? A stranger or someone from the village?" Bentley hesitated, then shook his head. "Not that I saw. She kept to herself, mostly. Just went to work and came home. Except," he paused, frowning, "one evening, a week or so before, I heard her talking to someone at the door. A woman's voice, low, like they didn't want me to hear. I couldn't make out the words, and when I came downstairs, whoever it was had gone." Poirot's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "A woman, you say? You are certain?" "Yes," Bentley said, more firmly. "It wasn't loud, but it was a woman's voice. I didn't think much of it then. Mrs. McGinty knew everyone in the village." "Merci, Monsieur Bentley," Poirot said, rising. "You have been most helpful. Courage, mon ami. The truth, it will be found." As Spencer escorted him out, Poirot's mind was ablaze. The woman's voice at the door, the peculiar discovery. The hidden clipping, these were threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. Bentley's story, though vague, rang with the sincerity of a man out of his depth. The killer, Poirot suspected, was someone cleverer, someone who had orchestrated the crime to point squarely at the hapless lodger. Outside the station, Spence lit a cigarette, his face troubled. "What do you make of him, Mr. Poirot? He's not got the look of a killer, but the evidence is solid." Poirot adjusted his hat, his eyes distant. "The evidence, Superintendent, is like a stage set, convincing at a glance. but perhaps not so solid when one looks behind the scenery. The ransacking, it is too perfect, too designed to suggest a thief in a panic. And this woman's voice, Bentley heard it, is a clue, Nan. We must find who visited Madame McGinty, and why. Spence nodded, exhaling a plume of smoke. You think it's one of the village women, then? Someone she cleaned for? It is possible, Poirot said, his voice soft but certain. Madame McGinty, she was observant, curious. She saw something, or someone, that connected to this old newspaper article. That knowledge, it was her death sentence. We must learn more of her employers, the Upwards, the Rendels, the Carpenters, the Weatherbys. One of them, I think, hides a secret worth killing for. Spence stubbed out his cigarette, his jaw set. I'll get you the list of houses she worked at, and any gossip I can dig up. But tread carefully, Mr. Poirot. If you're right, the killer's still in Broad Hinny, and they won't take kindly to you sniffing about. Poirot's smile was serene, his confidence unshaken. Let them watch, mon ami. Hercule Poirot is not so easily deterred. I shall return to Brodheny and begin my inquiries. The truth, it is like a shadow, it cannot hide forever. As he stepped into the waiting taxi, Poirot's mind turned to the village, its neat cottages and guarded faces. A woman's voice, a hidden clipping, a staged crime each, was a piece of the puzzle. He would start with the households Mrs. McGinty had served, for there, he was certain, lay the key to her murder. The little grey cells, they were at work, and they would not rest until the killer's mask was torn away. Chapter 4. A curious clipping. The late morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the Three Ducks and casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where Hercule Poirot sat. His breakfast of toast and weak tea barely touched. His mind, sharp as ever, was preoccupied with the details Superintendent Spence had shared the previous evening after the interview with James Bentley. The torn newspaper clipping, found hidden beneath a floorboard in Mrs. McGinty's cottage, was no ordinary keepsake. It was a relic of a scandalous murder case from decades past, the trial of Lily Gambol, a young woman convicted of killing her aunt with a cleaver in a fit of rage. The article, yellowed and brittle, had been carefully preserved, as if Mrs. McGinty had sensed its importance. To Poirot, it was a beacon, illuminating a path to the truth. He sipped his tea, grimacing at its insipidity, and considered the implications. Mrs. McGinty, a charwoman with a penchant for noticing details, had worked in the homes of Broad Hinny's most prominent residents. Had she recognized someone from that old case? Had the clippings sparked a memory, or worse, a threat? Poirot's little grey cells hummed with the certainty that the article was the key to her murder. The killer, he reasoned, was someone whose past was tied to that crime, someone desperate to keep it buried. But who? Poirot rose, adjusting his tie with meticulous care, and prepared to visit the households where Mrs. McGinty had worked. He would pose as a harmless eccentric, a Belgian visitor with a vague interest in village life, all the while observing, listening, and probing. The killer, he knew, would be watching him too, and he must tread with caution. His first stop was Laburnum Cottage, home of Mrs. Laura Upward and her son, Robin. The house stood at the edge of Broad Hinny, a handsome Georgian structure with ivy-clad walls and a garden bursting with late roses. Poirot knocked, his walking stick tucked under his arm, and was greeted by a maid, a young woman with a brisk manner who introduced herself as Janet, Mrs. Upwards in the drawing-room. "Sir," she said, eyeing his polished shoes and waxed moustache with curiosity, "she's expecting you." Poirot had sent a note ahead, claiming an interest in local history and a desire to meet the village's leading lady. Mrs. Upwood, a widow of commanding presence, received him with a mixture of warmth and imperiousness. She was a tall woman in her 60s, with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, and eyes that missed nothing. Her drawing-room was a shrine to her theatrical passions, cluttered with scripts, playbills, and framed photographs of past performances. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, gesturing to a velvet chair, "how delightful to have a visitor from abroad. Broadhinny is dreadfully dull, though I do my best to liven it up. You're interested in our little village, I hear." Poirot bowed, his smile disarming. "Indeed, madame, I find the English countryside most charming, and I am told you are its heart, with your theatrical endeavours. Madame McGinty, she worked for you, Nan. A tragic loss." Mrs. Upwood's expression softened, but her eyes remained sharp. Poor Mrs. McGinty, yes, a dreadful business. She was an excellent worker, always polishing and scrubbing. A bit too fond of gossip, mind you, but reliable. I was shocked to hear of her death." Poirot nodded, his tone sympathetic. "It is curious, is it not, that such a tragedy should strike so quiet a place. She spoke often of her work, perhaps, of the lives she glimpsed in these fine houses." Mrs. Upwood's lips twitched, as if weighing her response. "Oh, she chatted endlessly about my scripts, Robin's untidiness, even the Rendels. Domestic squabbles. Nothing serious, just servants' talk. I paid it little mind. And yet," Poirot said, his voice soft but probing, "she may have noticed something significant, a paper, perhaps, or a photograph that stirred her curiosity." Mrs. Upwood's fingers paused on the arm of her chair, a fleeting tension, not that I recall. "She was always poking about, but I keep nothing of interest lying round. My life is an open book, Monsieur Poirot." Her smile was gracious, but Poirot sensed a barrier, a careful guard against intrusion. Robin Upwood entered then, his colourful scarf a splash of vibrancy against the room's muted tones. "Mother, you're monopolizing our guest," he said, his voice light but his eyes appraising Poirot. "Monsieur, you must come to our next rehearsal. We're staging a little murder mystery ironic, given recent events." Poirot smiled, noting Robin's deflection. "I should be delighted, monsieur. Madame McGinty, she assisted with your productions." "Oh yes," Robin said, flopping into a chair. "Sewed costumes, swept the stage. She had an eye for detail, I'll give her that. Always muttering about some trinket or letter she'd found while cleaning. I told her she'd make a fine detective." He laughed, but it rang hollow, thanked them and took his leave, his mind cataloguing their reactions. Mrs. Upwood's poise was formidable, but her pause suggested unease. Robin's flippancy masked something nervousness, perhaps. The clipping, Poirot thought, might have been found here, among the clutter of scripts and photographs. His next visit was to the Rendels' home, a modern villa with a sterile neatness. That contrasted with Laburnum Cottage's warmth. Dr. John Rendel, a man in his 40s with a tired face and a professional air, welcomed Poirot with a distracted courtesy. His wife Eve was a slender woman with restless hands and eyes that darted to her husband at every question. Poirot repeated his tale of historical interest, steering the conversation to Mrs. McGinty. She was thorough, Dr. Rendel said, his tone clipped. Kept the place spotless. A bit too curious, perhaps, but no trouble. Eve's voice was sharp, almost brittle. She was always underfoot, poking into corners. I told her to stick to cleaning, but she'd prattle on about the village, the carpenter's new furniture, or Mrs. Upwood's plays. It was tiresome. Poirot's eyes softened, encouraging confidence. And did she ever speak of finding something unexpected? A document, perhaps, that caught her eye? Eve's hands froze, and she glanced at her husband before answering. No, nothing like that. She was just nosy. I didn't pay attention to her chatter. Dr. Rendell frowned, his voice firm. We've nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot. Mrs. McGinty's death was a shock, but it's settled. That Bentley fellow did it, didn't he? Poirot inclined his head, non-committal. So it is said, monsieur. Yet I find it curious, the violence of such a crime in so peaceful a village. As he left, Poirot noted Eve's pallor, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Her unease was palpable, a crack in the facade of domestic calm. The clipping, he suspected, had stirred something in this household too. His final stop was the carpenter's residence, a grand house with manicured lawns and a gleaming motor car in the drive. Guy Carpenter, a handsome man with the polished charm of a politician, greeted Poirot with a firm handshake. His wife, Maud, exuded confidence, her auburn hair catching the light as she offered tea. Poirot accepted, observing their practiced ease. Mrs. McGinty was a godsend, Guy said, his voice smooth. Kept the house in order, never complained. Her death was a tragedy, but the police have their man. Maud's smile was tight. She was efficient, I'll say that. Always fussing over details, my jewellery, Guy's papers. I suppose she meant well. Poirot's tone was light, almost casual. And did she ever mention a discovery? A paper, perhaps, that seemed out of place? Maud's eyes flicked to her husband, a fleeting glance. Not really. She'd ramble about old magazines or letters she found while dusting, but nothing important. Why do you ask? Poirot smiled enigmatically. A whim, madame. I am curious about the life of this poor woman. As he departed, Poirot felt the weight of their guarded responses. The carpenters were poised, but Maud's glance suggested a shared secret. The clipping, he thought, was no random find. Mrs. McGinty had stumbled upon a connection to the Lily Gamboli case, and someone in these households feared exposure. Back at the Three Ducks, Poirot sat by the fire, a notebook in hand. He sketched a diagram of the households Upwood, Rendell, Carpenter, Weatherby, linking them to Mrs. McGinty's work. The clipping, he wrote, was the pivot. Lily Gambol, convicted of a brutal murder, had vanished after her release. Was she here, in Broadhine, hiding under a new name? Was she Eve Rendell, with her nervous eyes? Maud Carpenter, with her sharp wit? Or another, yet to be uncovered? He recalled Spence's description of the clipping, a grainy photograph of a young woman, defiant in the dock, and a lurid account of her crime. Mrs. McGinty, with her sharp eyes and nosy habits, had seen a resemblance, perhaps in a face or a keepsake. Poirot closed his notebook, his mind clear. He would visit the Weatherbys next, but first he would return to Mrs. McGinty's cottage to see the scene of the crime himself. The clipping, the ransacked room, the missing sugar hammer, these were clues to a mind that planned, not panicked. And Hercule Poirot would find that mind, no matter how cleverly it hid. Chapter 5. The households of Broadhinith. Morning mist hung low over Broadhinith, cloaking the village in a veil of secrecy that Hercule Poirot found most fitting for his purpose. He stood outside the Three Ducks Inn, his overcoat buttoned against the chill, his eyes scanning the quiet lanes. The village, with its neat cottages and orderly gardens, seemed to guard its secrets as fiercely as its inhabitants guarded their reputations. Mrs. McGinty's death, Poirot mused, was no random act of violence. The newspaper clipping, the staged ransacking, the missing sugar hammer all pointed to a mind both cunning and desperate. Today he would continue his exploration of the households where the charwoman had worked. Seeking the thread that connected her death to a past crime, Poirot's first destination was the Weatherby household, a sombre, ivy-draped house at the far end of the village. Unlike the polished elegance of the carpenter's residence or the theatrical clutter of Laburnum Cottage, the Weatherby's home exuded an air of faded gentility. The paint on the shutters was peeling, and the garden was overgrown with weeds, as if the occupants had long ceased to care for appearances. Poirot knocked his gloved hand precise, and was admitted by a dure maid who led him to a sitting room heavy with the scent of old books and damp Mr. Weatherby. A gaunt man with a pinched face and a perpetual scowl greeted Poirot with barely concealed irritation. "Monsieur Poirot, is it?" he said, his voice dry as dust. "I don't know what you want with us. We've little to do with village affairs." Poirot bowed, his smile disarming. "I am a visitor, monsieur, with an interest in the history of Brodhinnie. I understand Madame McGinty worked for you, and her tragic end has touched me. I wish only to pay my respects and learn of her life here." Mrs. Weatherby, a frail woman with nervous hands and a faded beauty, sat by the window, her embroidery untouched. "She was a good worker," she said softly, her voice tinged with unease, "always bustling about, cleaning. A bit too talkative, perhaps, but no harm in her." Their daughter, Deirdre Henderson, entered, her plain face pale and her eyes downcast. She was a tall girl, awkward in her movements, dressed in a shapeless skirt and cardigan. Poirot noted her reticence, the way her hands twisted together as she stood by her mother. "Miss Henderson," he said gently, "you knew Madame McGinty as well?" Deirdre nodded, barely meeting his gaze. "She cleaned here twice a week. She liked to chat about the village, the people she worked for. I didn't always listen." Poirot tilted his head, his tone light but probing. "And did she ever speak of something unusual? A discovery, perhaps, while she worked? Paper or an object that intrigued her?" Deirdre's eyes flicked to her stepfather, then back to Poirot. "Not really. She was always finding things, old letters, photographs. She'd laugh about them, say they told stories. But nothing specific." Mr. Weatherby snorted. The woman was a busybody, always poking into corners where she didn't belong. "I told her to stick to her dusting, but she'd prattle on about the Upwards plays or the carpenter's fancy furniture. Waste of time." Poirot's smile remained fixed, but his mind was alert. The Weatherby's discomfort was palpable, though whether it stemmed from grief, irritation, or something deeper, he could not yet say. "And this tragedy," he said, "it must have shocked you. Did Madame McGinty ever seem afraid or speak of anyone who troubled her?" Mrs. Weatherby's needle paused mid-stitch. "Afraid? No, not that I noticed. She was cheerful, always bustling." Though she hesitated, glancing at her husband. "She did say once, a few days before she died, that she'd seen something. That set her thinking. I didn't ask what. She was always full of notions." Poirot's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Most interesting, madame. And where was she working when she said this?" Mrs. Weatherby frowned, her memory vague. "I don't recall. She worked for so many, as the Upwards, the Rendels, the Carpenters. It could have been any of them. Deirdre spoke suddenly, her voice low. She mentioned a photograph once, said it reminded her of something from a long time ago. I thought she was just being fanciful. Poirot's eyes gleamed, but he did not press. Merci, mademoiselle. You have a good memory. Such details, they are most helpful. As he took his leave, Poirot noted the tension in the room. Mr. Weatherby's scowl, Mrs. Weatherby's fidgeting hands, Deirdre's averted gaze. The mention of a photograph echoed the newspaper clipping, and Poirot wondered if Mrs. McGinty had seen a face from the past in one of these households. The Weatherbys, with their air of decay, seemed unlikely killers, but secrets, he knew, thrived in such places. His next stop was to revisit Laburnum Cottage, this time to observe Mrs. Upward and Robin in a less formal setting. He had telephoned ahead, claiming a desire to discuss the village's theatrical history, and Mrs. Upward had invited him for tea. As he approached, he saw Robin in the garden, gesticulating wildly as he rehearsed lines with a young woman. Poirot did not recognize her. Local actress, perhaps, with a sharp face and expressive hands. Robin waved him over, his smile theatrical. Monsieur Poirot, come to join the drama. This is Sheila, our leading lady. We're working on a scene murder and mayhem, just your sort of thing. Poirot bowed to Sheila, who giggled nervously. I prefer to observe, Monsieur Upward. The stage, it is a mirror to life, Nan. And Madame McGinty, she played her part here, I understand. Robin's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. Oh yes, she was a treasure. Sewed costumes, polished the floors, had an eye like a hawk, noticed every dropped pin. Pity about her end. Makes one wonder who's safe. Mrs. Upward appeared at the door, her presence commanding. Monsieur Poirot, do come in. Tea's ready, and I've dug out some old playbills you might enjoy. The drawing-room was as cluttered as before, but Poirot's eyes were drawn to a side table where a photograph album lay open. He accepted a cup of tea, his movements deliberate, and steered the conversation to Mrs. McGinty. She must have been a great help, madame, with your productions. Did she ever speak of her other employers? The Rendels, perhaps, or the Carpenters? Mrs. Upward's eyes narrowed slightly, but her tone was airy. Oh, she'd chatter about everyone. Said Dr. Rendel was always misplacing his papers, and Mrs. Carpenter was fussy about her silver. Nothing out of the ordinary. She was a gossip, but harmless. Poirot sipped his tea, his gaze drifting to the album. And photographs, madame. Did she ever comment on those? They can stir memories, Nan. Robin laughed, a touch too loudly. Mrs. McGinty. She'd go on about anything: old clothes, old pictures. Once said she saw a photo here that reminded her of a newspaper story, probably some silly scandal she read about. Poirot's heart quickened, but he kept his voice light. A newspaper story, how intriguing. Did she say more? Mrs. Upward interjected, her tone firm. Nothing worth repeating. She was always fanciful. Now, Monsieur Poirot, let me show you these playbills. As she guided him to a stack of faded programs, Poirot glanced at the album, noting a photograph of a young woman in theatrical costume, her face half hidden by shadow. Was this what Mrs. McGinty had seen? He filed the image away, knowing he must tread carefully. The Upwards were charming, but their charm was a shield. His final visit was to the Rendels' villa, where he hoped to probe Eve's nervousness further. Dr. Rendell was absent, but Eve received him in the parlour, her hands twisting a silk scarf. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice strained, "I didn't expect you again. Is this about Mrs. McGinty?" Poirot nodded, his expression sympathetic. "I wish only to understand her life, madame. She worked here, and I am told she was observant. Did she ever mention finding something unexpected? A letter, perhaps, or a photograph?" Eve's face paled, and she stood abruptly, crossing to a window. "No, nothing like that. She was always tidying, moving things. It was annoying, really. I told her to leave my things alone." Poirot watched her closely, noting the tremor in her hands, and yet she may have seen something that troubled her, a memory, perhaps, from long ago. Eve turned, her eyes sharp. "I don't know what you mean. She was just a cleaner. If she saw something, she never told me." Poirot rose, bowing. "Merci, madame. You have been most kind." As he walked back to the inn, the pieces of the puzzle shifted in his mind. The Weatherby's unease, the upwards deflection, Eve Rendell's fear-all, pointed to a secret linked to the Lily Gambol case. The photograph Deirdre mentioned, the newspaper story Robin dismissed. Eve's agitation, these were clues to a hidden identity. Mrs. McGinty had seen something in one of these homes, something that connected to the clipping. Poirot's task was clear. He must find that connection and the killer who guarded it. Chapter 6. The disguise of Monsieur Dupont, the village of Broadhinny, lay bathed in the soft glow of an autumn afternoon, its cobblestone lanes and thatched roofs deceptively serene under a sky streaked with wisps of cloud. Hercule Poirot, however, saw beyond the picturesque facade. The threads of Mrs. McGinty's murder were weaving together in his mind, each clue her nosy habits, the hidden newspaper clipping, the mysterious woman's voice at her door pointing to a secret buried in one of the village's respectable households. To unravel it, Poirot knew he must blend into the village's daily life, becoming a figure unremarkable yet ever present. Thus he adopted a new persona, Monsieur Dupont, a bumbling Belgian genealogist with a penchant for local law. Poirot adjusted his attire with care, choosing a slightly rumpled tweed suit, a bow tie just askew enough to suggest harmless eccentricity, and a pair of spectacles perched low on his nose. His mustache, still impeccably waxed, was the only concession to his true self. Armed with a leather-bound notebook and a vague story of tracing family histories, he set out to mingle with Broadhinny's residents, his sharp eyes missing nothing. His first stop was the post office, a cramped shop where the air smelled of ink and sealing wax. Miss Birch, the postmistress, stood behind the counter, her wiry frame bustling as she sorted letters, her eyes, bright with the gossip manger's zeal, lit up at the sight of a new face. "Good day, sir," she said, peering over her glasses. "You're the gentleman from the Three Ducks, aren't you? Buying stamps, or just passing through?" Poirot bowed, his accent deliberately thickened. "Monsieur Dupont, Mademoiselle, a student of genealogies. I seek the stories of Broadhinny's families, their roots, their histories, and, perhaps, a few stamps for my correspondence." Miss Birch's face brightened, sensing an opportunity to talk. "Genealogies, is it? Well, you've come to the right place. I know everyone in Broadhinny, and their mothers' too. What family are you after?" Poirot smiled, his tone airy but calculated. "I begin broadly, mademoiselle. The prominent families, the Upwards, the Rendells, the Carpenters, the Weatherbys. I am told a Madame McGinty worked for them. A tragic..." Figure Nan, did she ever speak of her employers? Miss Birch leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Oh, Mrs. McGinty was a talker, all right. Came in here regular, full of tales about the big houses. Said Mrs. Upward was always fussing over her plays. And young Robin left scripts everywhere. Dr. Rendell's wife, Eve, she called jumping at shadows. The Carpenters, now, she said they had grand things, but Mrs. Carpenter was particular about her silver, and the Weatherbys, well, she pitied poor Deirdre, living under that sour Mr. Weatherby's thumb. Poirot nodded, encouraging her flow. Most interesting. And did she ever mention finding something out of the ordinary? A document, perhaps, or a photograph that caught her eye? Miss Birch's eyes narrowed, her memory stirred. Funny. You should ask. A week or so before she died, she came in, all aflutter, said she'd found something odd while cleaning. Wouldn't say what, just hinted it was in one of the houses. I pressed her, but she just laughed and said it was a queer thing to turn up after all these years. I thought she was making it up to sound important. Poirot's pulse quickened, but his face remained bland. A queer thing, you say? In which house did she indicate? She didn't, more's the pity, Miss Birch said, shaking her head. Could have been any of 'em. She worked all over, you see. Mind you, she was always poking about, looking at old papers or trinkets. Said they told stories about people. Stories. Indeed, Poirot murmured, purchasing a sheet of stamps he did not need. You have been most helpful, mademoiselle. The past, it has a way of speaking, Nan. As he left the post office, Poirot's mind churned. Mrs. McGinty's odd discovery aligned with the newspaper clipping about Lily Gambol's trial. Had she found it in one of the houses, or had it sparked a memory of something else? Face, a photograph, a secret. The postmistress's gossip confirmed the charwoman's habit of noticing too much, a trait that had likely led to her death. Poirot's next move was to visit Mrs. McGinty's cottage, a modest dwelling at the edge of the village, now sealed by the police. Superintendent Spence had arranged access, and a young constable, P.C. Jenkins, met him there. His face flushed with the importance of his task. The cottage was small, its stone walls damp with age, its windows curtained with faded chintz. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the ghost of violence. Poirot stepped carefully, his eyes scanning the parlour where Mrs. McGinty had been found. The room was tidy now, the blood scrubbed from the floorboards. But Poirot could imagine the scene. The body crumpled by the hearth, the sugar hammer missing, the drawers pulled open in a semblance of robbery. He knelt by the floorboard where the clipping had been hidden, its loose edge barely noticeable. Why hide it there, he wondered. Had Mrs. McGinty feared someone would find it, or had she meant to confront her killer with it? P.C. Jenkins, hovering nervously, cleared his throat. Not much to see now, sir. We searched it top to bottom, just the clipping and that tin box with her savings empty, except for a few shillings. Nodded, his fingers tracing the floorboard. And the sugar hammer, constable. No trace of it. None, sir, Jenkins said. Likely the killer took it. Odd weapon, though. Most folks would use a poker or a knife. Precisement, Poirot said, rising. The choice of weapon, it is significant. A sugar hammer is not an object. Of impulse it is deliberate, chosen to mislead. He moved to the kitchen, where Mrs. McGinty's stacks of old newspapers were still piled in a corner. He sifted through them, finding nothing but recipes and village notices. Yet the clipping, Spence had said, was from a national paper, dated decades ago. It was no accident, Poirot thought. Mrs. McGinty had kept it for a reason as he left the cottage. Poirot spotted Deirdre Henderson across the street, her basket heavy with groceries. She hesitated, then approached, her plain face anxious. "Monsieur." "Poirot," she said, her voice low. "Are you?" Looking into Mrs. McGinty's death, Poirot bowed, sensing an opportunity. "I am but a visitor, mademoiselle, with a curiosity about such tragedies. You knew her well, I think." Deirdre's eyes dropped to her basket. "She was kind to me. Used to talk while she worked at our house. She showed me something once, a week before she died. A newspaper cutting about an old murder. Said it reminded her of someone in the village." Poirot's heart leaped, but he kept his tone. Gentle, a newspaper cutting. Most intriguing. Did she say who it reminded her of? Deirdre shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "No, she wouldn't tell me. Just said it was a shock to see it after all these years. I didn't think much of it then, but now, I wonder if it's why she was killed." Poirot studied her, noting her genuine unease. "You were wise to tell me, mademoiselle. This cutting, it was about a woman, perhaps, a crime from long ago." Deirdre nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, a woman who killed someone." Mrs. McGinty seemed excited, but nervous too. "I should have asked more, but father doesn't like me gossiping." "Mercy, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his smile reassuring. "You have done well to speak. If you recall more, you will find me at the Three Ducks." As Deirdre hurried away, Poirot's mind raced. The clipping was indeed the pivot of the case. Mrs. McGinty had recognized someone likely a woman in Broadhinny as Lily Gambol, the convicted murderess. But who? Eve Rendell with her nervous glances, Maud Carpenter with her sharp poise, or another hiding in plain sight. Back at the inn, Poirot sat by the fire, his notebook open. He sketched a list of the women in the households. Laura Upward, Eve Rendell, Maud Carpenter, Deirdre Henderson, even Mrs. Weatherby. One of them, he suspected, was Lily Gambol, living under a new identity. The clipping had been a spark, igniting Mrs. McGinty's curiosity and sealing her fate. Poirot closed his notebook, his eyes narrowing. He would attend Mrs. Upward's theatrical gathering, where the village's players would be on display. There, among the masks of politeness, he would watch for a telltale sign, a glance, a word that would betray the killer. Chapter 7. A theatrical evening. The evening air in Broadhinny carried a crisp edge, and the lights of Laburnum Cottage glowed warmly against the gathering dusk as Hercule Poirot approached, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. Mrs. Laura Upward's theatrical gathering promised to be a microcosm of the village's social fabric, a stage where its player suspects, in Poirot's mind, would reveal themselves through unguarded moments. He had accepted her invitation with a flourish, posing as Monsieur Dupont, the genealogist. But his true purpose was to observe the interactions of those Mrs. McGinty had served. The newspaper clipping, with its tale of Lily Gambol's long ago crime, weighed heavily in his thoughts. Somewhere in this gathering, he suspected, was a woman whose past was a dangerous secret. The drawing room of Laburnum Cottage was a riot of colour and clutter, its walls adorned with theatrical posters and shelves crammed with scripts. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows over the assembled guests. Mrs. Upward presided with regal authority, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier, as she directed her son, Robin, and his troupe in preparations for their latest amateur production, a murder mystery, aptly enough. Poirot, in his tweed suit and slightly askewed bow tie, blended into the crowd, his spectacles glinting as he surveyed the room. Robin Upward, resplendent in a scarlet waistcoat, was holding court near a grand piano, his animated gestures drawing. Laughter from Sheila Rendell, the sharp-faced actress Poirot had glimpsed in the garden. Dr. John Rendell and his wife Eve stood by a bookcase, he with a distracted air, she clutching a glass of sherry with trembling fingers. Guy and Maud Carpenter occupied a sofa, their polished charm a contrast to the Weatherbys, who lingered near the dormister, Weatherby scowling, his wife pale and silent, and Deirdre Henderson hovering awkwardly at their side. The room buzzed with polite chatter, but Poirot sensed an undercurrent of tension. Like a tightly strung wire dot, Mrs. Upward swept toward him, her smile gracious but commanding. "Monsieur Dupont, how delightful you could join us. You must forgive the chaos we're deep in rehearsals. Have you met everyone?" Poirot bowed, his voice warm but measured. "Not yet, madame, but I am enchanted to be among such company. Your gatherings, they are the heart of Broadheeney Nan." She laughed, a touch too brightly. "I try to keep the village from sinking into dullness. Come, let me introduce you." As she led him around, Poirot's eyes were everywhere, noting the subtle dynamics. Dr. Rendell offered a curt nod, his attention drifting to his wife, who avoided Poirot's gaze, her fingers tightening on her glass. Maud Carpenter's smile was sharp, her eyes appraising him as if gauging his purpose. Deirdre Henderson mumbled a greeting, her plain face flushed, while Mr. Weatherby muttered something about foreigners and retreated to a corner. Robin, ever the showman, clapped Poirot on the shoulder, insisting he join a rehearsal scene. "You'd make a splendid detective, Monsieur Dupont," Robin said, his eyes twinkling. "We're staging a murder, and you've the look of a man who could solve one." Poirot's moustache twitched, a private amusement. "Perhaps, monsieur, but I prefer to watch. The stage, it reveals much about the players, does it not?" Robin grinned, but Poirot caught a flicker of wariness in his expression. The evening progressed with readings from the script, the actors stumbling through lines as Mrs. Upward offered sharp critiques. Poirot, seated near the fire, listened less to the dialogue than to the silences, the glances exchanged, the hesitations, the forced laughter. He steered the conversation, with delicate skill, toward the past. "A village like Broadheeney," he said during a lull, addressing the room, "it must have its share of stories. Scandals, perhaps, from long ago. In my studies of genealogy, I find old crimes often linger in memory." Mrs. Upward's smile tightened. "Broadheeney's too dull for scandals, Monsieur Dupont. We're a quiet lot, aren't we?" Maud Carpenter laughed, her voice like cut glass. "Oh, I don't know. Laura, every village has its secrets, though I dare say Mrs. McGinty knew more than most, with her dusting and prying." Eve Rendell's glass clinked against a table, a sharp sound in the sudden quiet. She was a gossip, Eve said, her voice brittle, always talking about what she saw in people's houses. It was tiresome. Poirot's eyes softened, encouraging her to continue. "And what did she see, madame?" "Old letters, perhaps, photographs that told stories." Eve's face paled, and she turned to her husband. "Nothing important, just odds and ends. She made too much of them." Dr. Rendell frowned, his tone firm. Mrs. McGinty was a cleaner, not a detective. If she saw anything, it was none of her business. Poirot nodded, his expression bland, but his mind was alert. Eve's discomfort was stark, her husband's defensiveness equally telling. He glanced at Maud, who watched Eve with a faint, knowing smile. Was it amusement or something more? Deirdre Henderson, standing by the window, seemed to shrink into herself, her eyes fixed on the floor. Robin, sensing the tension, clapped his hands. Enough. Gloom. Let's have another scene. Monsieur Dupont, care to read the part of the inspector? Poirot demurred with a wave, content to observe. As the rehearsal resumed, he slipped away to the side table where he had seen the photograph album on his previous visit. Under the guise of examining a playbill, he opened the album, his fingers deft. The pages were filled with images of past productions, Mrs. Upward in costume, Robin striking dramatic poses, and, among them, a faded photograph of a young woman in a 1920s dress, her face defiant, her eyes hauntingly familiar. Breath caught. The resemblance to the description of Lily Gambol from the newspaper clipping was uncanny. Was this what Mrs. McGinty had seen? He closed the album as Mrs. Upward approached, her eyes sharp. Interested in our theatrical history, Monsieur Dupont? Maze. Oui, Madame, Poirot said, his smile serene. The past, it is full of surprises, Nan. She nodded, but her gaze lingered, as if trying to read his intentions. Poirot returned to his seat, his mind racing. The photograph, tucked among innocent mementos, was a clue. Had Mrs. McGinty recognized the face as Lily Gambol's? Had she confronted someone or hinted at blackmail? The killer, Poirot thought, was in this room, watching him as closely as he watched them as the evening wound down. Poirot made his farewells, noting the strained politeness of the guests. Eve Rendell left quickly, her husband close behind. Maud Carpenter lingered, her conversation with Robin animated but guarded. Deirdre Henderson slipped out with her parents, her face a mask of unease. Mrs. Upward, ever the hostess, pressed Poirot to return for the performance, her charm a polished veneer. Back at the Three Docks Inn, Poirot sat by his window, the village dark and silent beyond. He opened his notebook, adding the photograph to his list of clues. The theatrical evening had revealed more than lines from a script. It had shown him fear, deflection, and hidden knowledge. Eve's nerves, Maud's sharpness, the Upwards guarded charmal, were pieces of the puzzle. The photograph, he suspected, was the key. Mrs. McGinty had seen it, or one like it, and linked it to the clipping. That link had cost her life. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he considered his next move. He must confirm the photograph's significance, perhaps by examining the clipping itself, which Spence had promised to send, and he must watch Eve Rendell closely. Her fear suggested she knew more than she admitted. The killer, he thought, was growing uneasy. Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, was closing in, and the stage was set for the truth to emerge. Chapter 8. The Hidden Past, the morning after the theatrical gathering at Laburnum Cottage. Hercule Poirot sat in his room at the Three Ducks Inn, the weak sunlight filtering through the window barely warming the chill in the air. His breakfast tray, with its lukewarm tea and slightly burnt toast, remained untouched, for his mind was wholly occupied with the puzzle of Mrs. McGinty's murder. The photograph he had glimpsed in Mrs. Upward's album, with its haunting resemblance to the description of Lily Gambol, had sharpened his focus. The newspaper clipping, hidden under a floorboard in Mrs. McGinty's cottage, was no mere curiosity, was a thread to a past crime that someone in Broadhinny was desperate to conceal. Poirot's little grey cells were alight with the certainty that the killer was among the village's respectable women. her identity masked by years of careful deception. Poirot opened his notebook, his pen moving with precision as he listed the women of the households: Laura Upward, Eve Rendell, Maud Carpenter, Deirdre Henderson, and Mrs. Weatherby. One of them, he suspected, was Lily Gambol, the young woman who had struck down her aunt with a cleaver decades ago. Released from prison after a reduced sentence, she had vanished, her whereabouts unknown. Had she rebuilt her life in Broadhinny under a new name? Mrs. McGinty, with her sharp eyes and nosy habits, had seen something, a photograph, a keepsake that connected to the clipping. That discovery, Poirot was convinced, had led to her death. He rose, adjusting his tie with meticulous care, and prepared to dig deeper into the Lily Gambol case. Superintendent Spence had promised to send the original clipping, but Poirot needed more. He telephoned Spence, requesting access to police archives or newspaper records about the trial. "It is imperative," mon ami Poirot said, his voice firm. "The past holds the key to our present mystery." Spence, his tone weary but cooperative, agreed to arrange a visit to the Kilchester police station, where old case files were stored. "I'll have them pull what we have on Gambol," he said. "But it's a long shot, Mr. Poirot. That case is 20 years old. Why's it so important?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Because, Superintendent, someone in Broadhinny fears its resurrection. I will be there this afternoon." Before leaving, Poirot decided to revisit Mrs. McGinty's cottage, hoping to uncover any overlooked clues. The constable, P.C. Jenkins, met him at the door, his youthful face eager but slightly awed by the diminutive Belgian. "Back again, sir," Jenkins said, unlocking the cottage. "Not much left to see, I'm afraid." Poirot smiled enigmatically. The eyes of Hercule Poirot, they see what others miss. "Permit me to look, constable." The cottage was as he remembered, small, damp, and heavy with the memory of violence. Poirot moved slowly through the parlour, his gaze lingering on the hearth where Mrs. McGinty had been found, her skull shattered by the missing sugar hammer. He examined the floorboard where the clipping had been hidden, its edges worn but secure. Why hide it there, he wondered. Had she feared theft or discovery? He sifted through the remaining newspapers in the kitchen, finding only local stories and advertisements. The clipping, with its tale of murder, stood apart, a deliberate keepsake as he searched. Poirot's thoughts returned to Deirdre Henderson's revelation. Mrs. McGinty had shown her the clipping, hinting it reminded her of someone in the village. Deirdre's nervous sincerity suggested she knew little more, but her words confirmed the charwoman's excitement tanned her danger. Poirot stepped outside, his eyes scanning the street. A figure caught his attention: Sheila Rendell, the actress from Mrs. Upward's troupe, hurrying past with a parcel under her arm. Her sharp features were tense, her glance fleeting but wary. Poirot filed the observation away. Sheila, though not a primary suspect, was part of the village's web, and every thread mattered. At the Kilchester police station, Spence greeted him with a thick file, its pages yellowed and dusty. "This is all we've got on Lily Gambol," he said, sliding it across a desk. "Trial records, newspaper reports, and a few photographs. Nasty case-made headlines in its day." Poirot settled into a chair, his gloved hands careful as he opened the file. The story unfolded in stark detail. Lily Gambol, a shop girl of 22, had lived with her aunt, a domineering widow, in a London suburb. In 1928, after a heated argument, Lily had struck her aunt with a cleaver, killing her instantly. The trial was sensational. with tabloids painting Lily as a cold-blooded murderess. She claimed self-defense, alleging her aunt's cruelty, but the jury convicted her of manslaughter. Sentenced to 7 years, she served 5 before her release in 1933. After that, the trail went cold. Poirot studied the photographs, a grainy image of Lily in the dock, her face pale but defiant, her dark eyes striking even in the faded print. Another showed her leaving prison, her features obscured by a scarf. The resemblance to the photograph in Mrs. Upward's album was unmistakable. Though time had altered, the face sharpened by youth then, softened or disguised now. Poirot's fingers tapped the file. This woman, he said to Spence, she could be here, in Broadhinny, living as another. Madame McGinty, she saw her, or something that betrayed her. Spence frowned, rubbing his jaw. You think one of the village women is Lily Gam? That's a stretch, Mr. Poirot. She'd be in her 40s now, respectable, settled. Who'd you have in mind? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I name no names, yet, but consider Eve Rendell, with her nervous hands, Maud Carpenter, with her sharp poise, even Madame Upward, with her commanding air. One of them, perhaps, hides a past. The clipping, it was a spark, and Madame McGinty's curiosity was the flame. Spence leaned back, skeptical but intrigued. And the murder? You think she tried to blackmail this woman? Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice soft. Or perhaps she merely hinted, unaware of the danger. The sugar hammer, the ransacked room, these suggest a mind that plans, that misleads. We must look closer at the households. Spence nodded, handing Poirot a copy of the clipping. Here's the original, as promised. Keep it safe. If you're right, someone won't like you having it. Poirot tucked the clipping into his pocket, his mind already mapping his next steps. He returned. To Broadhinny, the file's details etched in his memory. The photograph in Mrs. Upward's album, the clipping. Deirdre's story all pointed to a woman whose past was a ticking bomb. He decided to revisit the Weatherbys, sensing Deirdre's quiet honesty might yield more dot. At the Weatherby house, the air of decay was more oppressive, the silence broken only by the creak of floorboards. Deirdre answered the door, her plain face startled. Monsieur Dupont, she said, hesitating. Father's out, and mother's resting. Is this about Mrs. McGinty? Poirot bowed, his tone gentle. Indeed, mademoiselle, one wish only to clarify a small matter. You spoke of a newspaper cutting Madame McGinty showed you. Can you recall anything more? A name, perhaps, or why it troubled her? Deirdre's hands twisted her apron, her eyes darting to the empty hall. I've thought about it since. She said the cutting was about a woman who did something terrible years ago. She wouldn't say who it reminded her of, but she looked pleased, like she'd solved a puzzle. I asked if she'd tell anyone, and she said, not yet, but it's a fine thing to know. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A fine thing to know. That is most revealing. And this cutting, she showed it to you here, in this house. Deirdre nodded, then froze, as if realizing the implication. Yes, but it wasn't ours. She brought it with her, I think. Oh, I don't know. I shouldn't have said anything. Poirot raised a hand, calming her. You have done well. Mademoiselle, fear not. I seek only the truth to prevent further harm. As he left, Poirot's mind raced. Mrs. McGinty's excitement suggested she had not only recognized Lily Gambol, but considered using her knowledge, perhaps innocently. Perhaps not. The photograph in the upwards album, the clipping's hidden place, Eve Rendell's fear-all were converging. Poirot suspected the killer was growing nervous, aware that questions were stirring the villagers' calm. Back at the inn, he examined the clipping again, its faded text a grim reminder of violence. Lily Gambol's face stared back, her eyes a challenge across the years. Poirot closed his notebook, his resolve firm. He would return to Laburnum Cottage to probe Mrs. Upwood about the photograph. But he must move quickly. The killer, he sensed, was watching, and another life might be at stake. Chapter 9. A second tragedy. The dawn broke over Broadhinny with a deceptive calm. The village's thatched roofs glistening with dew under a pale, uncertain sky. Hercule Poirot, however, felt no such tranquillity. His sleep had been restless, his dreams haunted by the defiant eyes of Lily Gambol from the newspaper clipping and the shadowy photograph in Mrs. Upwood's album. The threads of the case, Mrs. McGinty's nosy habits, the hidden clipping, the staged crime scene were weaving a pattern, but the killer's identity remained elusive. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with the certainty that time was short. A murderer who had killed once to protect a secret would not hesitate to strike again. He sat at his small table in the Three Ducks and sipping a cup of barely tolerable coffee when a sharp rap at the door startled him. Mrs. Sweetyman, the landlady, stood there, her face ashen, her usual briskness replaced by a trembling urgency. "Monsieur Dupont," she said, forgetting his alias in her distress, "there's terrible news. Mrs. Upwood, she's dead. Found this morning in her drawing-room. Poisoned, they say. The village is in an uproar." Poirot's heart sank, though his expression remained composed. "Poisoned, you say? Mon Dieu, this is grave. Tell me, madame, what is known?" Mrs. Sweetyman wrung her hands, her voice low. "Janet, her maid, found her just after 8. She was slumped in her chair, a coffee cup spilled on the table. Dr. Rendell was called, but it was too late. They're saying it's morphine. Put it in her drink. The police are there now, and the village is buzzing. First Mrs. McGinty, now this." Poirot rose, his movements deliberate despite the urgency in his mind. "Merci, Madame Sweetyman. I must see this for myself. The Three Ducks, it will be my base, but I go now to Laburnum Cottage." He donned his overcoat, his mind racing. Mrs. Upwood's death was no coincidence. She had been at the heart of the theatrical gathering, her album containing the photograph that echoed Lily Gambol's face. Had she, like Mrs. McGinty, seen something she shouldn't? Had she confronted the killer or hinted at her knowledge? Poirot's steps quickened as he approached Laburnum Cottage, where a small crowd of villagers whispered behind their hands, their faces pale with shock. Superintendent Spence met him at the gate, his weathered face grim. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice low, "I was about to send for you. It's a bad business. Mrs. Upwood was poisoned last night, likely during that rehearsal you attended. Morphine in her coffee, the doctor says. No sign of a struggle, just the spilled cup." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Morphine, you say? A subtle choice, unlike the brutality of Madame McGinty's death. And the scene, it is undisturbed." Spence nodded, leading him inside. "Come see for yourself." The drawing-room was much as Poirot remembered, its theatrical clutter now a stark backdrop to tragedy. Mrs. Upwood's body had been removed, but the chair where she had sat remained, a dark stain on the carpet marking the spilled coffee. The cup, a delicate porcelain piece, lay on its side, its contents dried into a faint residue. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers tracing the table's edge, his eyes scanning for details. The album he had examined was still on the side table, but the photograph of the young woman was gone, its page torn. He straightened, his voice soft but urgent. "The photograph, Superintendent, it is missing. I saw it last night, a young woman from years ago, resembling the Lily Gambole of the clipping. This is no accident." Spence's brow furrowed. "You think Mrs. Upwood was killed because of what she knew?" "Like Mrs. McGinty, precisement," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "Madame Upwood was observant, like our charwoman. She may have recognized the significance of that photograph, or perhaps she spoke of it unwisely. The killer, they are, desperate to erase the past." Spence gestured to the room. "We've searched the place. No sign of the photograph, and nothing else seems missing. Robin Upwood's in a state says he was out late with his actress friend, Sheila, and came home to find his mother already dead. The maid confirms she served coffee to Mrs. Upwood around 9, during a break in the rehearsal." Poirot's mind turned the previous evening. The guests Steve Rendell, Maud Carpenter, Deirdre Henderson, and their families had all been present. Eve's nervous glances, Maud's sharp wit, Deirdre's reticence, any of them could have slipped morphine into the coffee. But how and why now? He stepped outside, where Robin Upwood stood, his colourful scarf askew, his face pale but his eyes dry. "Monsieur Dupont," he said, his voice strained, "this is madness. First Mrs. McGinty, now mother. What's happening to this village?" Poirot's tone was gentle, but his gaze was sharp. "A tragedy, Monsieur Upwood. Tell me, last night, who was near your mother during the rehearsal? Who handled her coffee?" Robin ran a hand through his hair, his theatrical air subdued. "Everyone was milling about. Janet brought the tray, but we all helped ourselves. Mother was particular about her coffee, liked it strong, no sugar. I don't know who could have done this. She was fine when I left, talking with Sheila about the script." Poirot nodded, filing away the detail. "And this photograph album, monsieur, it is yours?" Robin blinked, surprised. "The album, yes, it's mother's, full of old theatrical photos." "Why, a small matter," Poirot said, his smile enigmatic. "I noticed it last night. A photograph, perhaps held significance." Robin's eyes flickered, but he shrugged. "Mother was always sentimental about those pictures. I don't know about any one in particular." Poirot thanked him and moved to the garden, where Sheila Rendell stood, her sharp face drawn. She avoided his gaze, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "Monsieur Dupont," she said, her voice low, "it's awful. Mrs. Upwood was so kind. Who would do this?" Poirot studied her, noting her unease. "A question I ask myself, mademoiselle. You were here last night. Did you see anything unusual? A guest near Madame Upwood's coffee, perhaps?" Sheila's eyes darted away. "No, nothing. It was chaotic people coming and going. I was focused on my lines. I didn't notice her." Denial was too quick, Poirot thought, but he pressed no further. Instead, he returned to the drawing room, where Spence was questioning Janet, the maid. "I poured the coffee myself," Janet said, her voice trembling. "From the pot in the kitchen. Everyone took their own cups. I didn't see anyone tamper with anything." Poirot's mind churned. Morphine was a calculated choice, requiring access and opportunity. Unlike Mrs. McGinty's brutal death, this was silent, precise, a woman's method, perhaps. He recalled the sugar hammer, chosen to suggest a man's strength in the first murder. The killer, he realized, was adept at misdirection, crafting each crime to deflect suspicion. As he left Laburnum Cottage, Poirot's thoughts turned to the suspects. Eve Rendell's fear at the mention of old scandals, Maud Carpenter's knowing smile, Deirdre Henderson's quiet admission about the clipping all were threads in the tapestry. The missing photograph was the key. Mrs. Upwood, like Mrs. McGinty, had likely seen it and connected it to Lily Gamble. Had she hinted at her knowledge during the rehearsal? Had the killer acted swiftly to silence her? Poirot returned to the inn, his notebook open. He sketched a timeline. Mrs. McGinty's death 3 weeks ago, the clipping hidden, her hint to Deirdre about a village woman. Now, Mrs. Upwood, dead after a gathering where the photograph was visible. The killer was tying up loose ends, but Poirot was closing in. He wrote the names Eve Maud, Deirdre circling Eve's with a question mark. Her nervousness was stark, her husband's protectiveness a shield. Yet Maud's poise and Deirdre's reticence could also mask guilt. He resolved to confront the Rendells next, to probe Eve's fear. The killer, he sensed, was growing reckless, and a reckless killer was dangerous. Poirot closed his notebook, his eyes narrowing. The stage was set for a final act, and Hercule Poirot would ensure the curtain fell on the truth. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Broad Hinny, its golden rays doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the village in the wake of Mrs. Upwood's poisoning. Hercule Poirot, seated at his small table in the Three Ducks Inn, felt the weight of 2 murders pressing upon him. The deaths of Mrs. McGinty and Mrs. Upwood were linked by a single thread, the newspaper clipping about Lily Gamble, a woman whose past crime had resurfaced to haunt the present. The missing photograph from Mrs. Upwood's album, with its uncanny resemblance to the young murderess, confirmed Poirot's suspicion that the killer was a woman in Broad Hinny, hiding under a new identity. His little grey cells hummed with the certainty that the time had come to force the murderer's hand. Poirot's plan was bold yet delicate, a trap designed to provoke a reaction. He would gather the suspects, plant a seed of doubt, and watch for the telltale sign of guilt. The killer, he reasoned, was growing desperate, their careful facade cracking under the pressure of his inquiries. The morphine in Mrs. Upwood's coffee, the missing photograph, the staged ransacking of Mrs. McGinty's cottage all pointed to a mind adept at deception, but now cornered by fear. Poirot's task was to nudge that fear into a mistake. He telephoned Superintendent Spence, his voice crisp with purpose. "Mon ami, I require your assistance. We must assemble the principal persons of Broad Hinnathos connected to Madame McGinty and Madame Upwood at the Three Ducks this evening. I have a theory, but it needs testing. Can you arrange it?" Spence's tone was weary but cooperative. "I'll make it happen, Mr. Poirot. The village is on edge after Mrs. Upwood's death. They'll come, if only out of curiosity." "What's your plan?" Poirot's smile was unseen but audible. "A small deception, Superintendent. I shall suggest we have a witness, someone who saw a woman near Madame McGinty's cottage the night she died. The killer, they will react, and we shall observe." Spence hesitated. "Risky, sir. If the killer's as clever as you think, they might not take the bait." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "But even the cleverest mind betrays itself under pressure. Be there, and bring your men, discreetly." By 7 o'clock, the private parlour of the Three Ducks was prepared, its oak-panelled walls and heavy curtains creating an intimate, almost claustrophobic setting. Mrs. Sweetyman, flustered but efficient, had arranged chairs in a semicircle, a table set with tea and biscuits to maintain the pretense of a social gathering. Poirot, still in his guise as Monsieur Dupont, stood by the fire, his spectacles glinting as he greeted the arriving guests. Dr. John Rendell and Eve entered first. He with a strained politeness, she pale and clutching her scarf as if it were a lifeline. Maud and Guy Carpenter followed, their polished demeanour intact but their eyes watchful. Deirdre Henderson arrived with her mother, Mrs. Weatherby, the latter frail and silent, while Mr. Weatherby's absence was explained by a curt note about illness. Robin Upward, his flamboyance subdued by grief, came alone, his scarf a muted grey. Sheila Rendell, the actress, slipped in late, her sharp face tense. Superintendent Spence stood by the door, his presence official but unobtrusive, his men stationed outside. Poirot began, his voice calm but carrying a subtle authority. Madame et Messieurs, I thank you for coming on this sad evening. The deaths of Madame McGinty and Madame Upward have cast a shadow over Broadhine, and I, a humble visitor, have taken an interest in these tragedies. As a student of human nature, I believe the truth is near, but one piece remains missing. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, noting Eve's rigid posture, Maud's faint smile, Deirdre's downcast gaze. I have learned, he continued, that on the night Madame McGinty died, a witness saw a woman near her cottage, speaking with her at the door. This witness, they are reluctant to come forward, but their account suggests the killer is not James Bentley, but someone among us. A murmur rippled through the room, faces tightening with unease. Eve's hand flew to her throat, her eyes darting to her husband. Maud's smile froze, her fingers gripping her teacup. Deirdre's head snapped up, her plain face flushed. Robin's eyes narrowed, while Sheila fidgeted, her handkerchief twisting in her hands. Dr. Rendell spoke first, his voice sharp. This is preposterous, Monsieur Dupont. The police have their man. Bentley was convicted. Why stir things up with this story? Poirot's smile was serene. Because, monsieur, the truth does not always fit the verdict. Madame McGinty found a newspaper clipping, a story of an old crime, and it reminded her of someone in this village. Madame Upward, too, knew something perhaps. She saw a photograph that echoed that past. Both are dead. I ask myself, who feared their knowledge? Eve stood abruptly, her voice trembling. I can't listen to this. It's nonsense. John, I want to go home. Dr. Rendell took her arm, his face stern. Sit down, Eve. Let's hear him out. Maud Carpenter leaned forward, her tone cool but edged. You're suggesting one of us is a murderer, Monsieur Dupont. That's a bold claim for a genealogist. Poirot inclined his head, unperturbed. I suggest only what the facts suggest, madame. The clipping, it spoke of Lily Gambol, a woman who killed and vanished. Madame McGinty saw her, or her trace, in Broadhine. I am close to the truth, but I need this witness to confirm. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Poirot watched, his eyes sharp behind his spectacles. Eve's breathing was shallow, her hands clenched. Maud's poise remained, but her eyes flicked to the door. Deirdre stared at her lap, her fingers twisting. Sheila muttered something about needing air and slipped out, her departure noted by Spence. Poirot continued, his voice soft but relentless. The killer, they are clever, but not infallible. The sugar hammer, for Madame McGinty, the morphine for Madame Upwood. These are not the acts of a desperate man like Bentley, but of a mind that plans, that misleads. I will find this mind, Mies, Amos, with or without my witness. The gathering ended soon after, the guests dispersing with strained farewells. Eve left quickly, her husband guiding her out. Maud lingered, exchanging a word with Robin, who seemed distracted. Deirdre and her mother departed silently, their faces pale. Poirot, satisfied with the seed he had planted, retired to his room, but not before whispering to Spence, "Follow Madame Rendell. She is shaken, and she may act." That night, Spence stationed a constable near the Rendells' villa. Poirot, unable to sleep, sat by his window, the clipping in his hand. The trap had been set, and Eve's reaction, her abrupt departure, her palpable fear marked her as the most likely to break. Had she slipped morphine into Mrs. Upwood's coffee? Had she struck Mrs. McGinty with the sugar hammer, staging the robbery to frame Bentley? At midnight, Spence telephoned, his voice urgent. "Mr. Poirot, you were right. Eve Rendell left her house an hour ago, alone. My man followed her to Mrs. McGinty's cottage. She was searching, frantic, under the floorboards. We caught her." With this, he described a torn piece of paper, a fragment of the missing photograph from Mrs. Upwood's album. Poirot's heart quickened. "Bring her to the inn, Superintendent. The curtain, it is about to fall." Chapter 11. The confession. The private parlour of the Three Ducks Inn was dimly lit. The fire in the grate casting flickering shadows on the oak-panelled walls. Hercule Poirot stood by the hearth, his small frame radiating a quiet intensity, his eyes sharp behind the spectacles of his Monsieur Dupont disguise. The trap he had set at the gathering had borne fruit. Eve Rendell, caught searching Mrs. McGinty's cottage for the missing photograph, sat now across from him, her face pale, her hands trembling in her lap. Superintendent Spence stood by the door, his weathered face stern, a constable at his side. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of two murders pressing down on the room. Poirot had arranged the scene with care. A single lamp illuminated the table, where the torn newspaper clipping about Lily Gambol lay beside the fragment of the photograph from Mrs. Upwood's album. Eve's eyes darted to the items, her breath catching, but she said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dr. John Rendell, summoned urgently, stood behind her, his face a mask of confusion and dread. The stage was set, and Poirot, with his little grey cells at their peak, was ready to unveil the truth. "Madame Rendell," he began, his voice soft but carrying the weight of certainty. "You were seen tonight at the cottage of Madame McGinty, searching beneath the floorboards. You sought this, Nan." He gestured to the photograph fragment, its edges ragged, showing half a face, the same defiant eyes as Lily Gambol's in the clipping. "It is time, I think, to speak the truth." Eve's hands clenched, her voice a whisper. I don't know what you mean. I wasn't there. You've made a mistake." Poirot's smile was gentle, almost pitying. "Nan, Madame, there is no mistake. The constable, he saw you. And this photograph, it was taken from Madame Upwood's album, where I saw it 2 nights ago. You knew its significance, as did Madame McGinty. It is why she died, and why Madame Upwood followed her." Dr. Rendell stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is outrageous, Monsieur Dupont. My wife had nothing to do with those deaths. You're accusing her without proof." Poirot raised a hand, his gaze unwavering. "Proof, Monsieur Rendell, is what I bring. Let us consider the facts. Madame McGinty, a charwoman, found a newspaper clipping about Lily Gambol, a woman who killed her aunt with a cleaver in 1928. She hid it, perhaps sensing its value. She spoke to Mademoiselle Henderson of a face in the village that matched this. Passed. Then she is killed, her cottage staged to suggest a robbery by her lodger, James Bentley. The sugar-og hammer, an unusual weapon, was chosen to imply a man's strength. But it was a ruse, Nan. Eve's eyes widened, her breath shallow, but she remained silent. Poirot continued, his voice relentless yet calm. Madame Upward, she too saw something, a photograph in her album, a young woman from years ago. She died, poisoned with morphine, a subtle method, unlike the brutality of the first crime. The photograph was torn away, but not before I saw it. And tonight, Madame Rendell, you sought to destroy the evidence, to bury the past forever. Spence cleared his throat, holding up the photograph fragment. We found this in your possession, Mrs. Rendell. It matches the album. Care to explain? Eve's composure cracked, her voice rising in a desperate plea. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted it to stay buried. You don't understand what it's like, living with that shadow. Dr. Rendell's face drained of colour. Eve, what are you saying? What shadow? Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. Madame, you are Lily Gambol, are you not? You served your sentence, changed your name, built a new life. But Madame McGinty, she recognized you perhaps from this photograph, perhaps from another clue. She hinted at her knowledge, and you feared exposure. Eve's shoulders slumped, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm Lily. I was so young, so angry when it happened. My aunt, she was cruel, vicious. I didn't mean to kill her, but I did. I paid for it, 5 years in prison. When I got out, I wanted to start over. I became Eve, met John, built a life. No one knew. She looked at her husband, her eyes pleading. John, I swear, I never told you because I was afraid you'd leave. Me, I was happy, safe, until she found that wretched clipping. Poirot nodded, his voice gentle. And Madame McGinty, she saw the photograph, perhaps in the Upwards home, and linked it to the clipping. She spoke to you, we hinted at blackmail. Eve's hands covered her face. Not blackmail, not exactly. She came to me, said she'd seen my face in an old paper, that it set her thinking. She was sly, curious, said she'd keep quiet, but wanted money for her silence. I panicked. I went to her cottage that night, begged her to let it go. She laughed, said it was her little nest egg. I lost control. I grabbed the sugar hammer from her kitchen and struck her. I didn't mean to kill her, but she fell, and there was blood. Dr. Rendell staggered back, his face a mask of horror. Eve, no, you couldn't. I had to protect us. Eve cried, her voice raw. I staged the robbery, took her money to make it look like Bentley did it. I thought it was over, but then Mrs. Upward started asking questions. She'd seen that photograph in her album, said it reminded her of a scandal. I couldn't let her talk. I slipped morphine into her coffee during the rehearsal. It was so easy no one noticed. Poirot's eyes were steady, his voice low. And the photograph, you took it to destroy the evidence. But you could not find the clipping hidden by Madame McGinty. It was your undoing, Madame. Eve sobbed, her defiance crumbling. I just wanted to be free. I've lived with that guilt for years. I couldn't let it ruin everything. Spence stepped forward, his voice firm but not unkind. Mrs. Rendell, you'll need to come with us. You're under arrest for the murders of Mrs. McGinty and Mrs. Upwood. Dr. Rendell sank into a chair, his head in his hands, as the constable led Eve away. Poirot watched, a pang of sorrow tempering his satisfaction. The truth, though necessary, was never without pain. Spence turned to him, his face grim. You were right, Mr. Poirot. That trap of yours worked. But how did you know it was her? Poirot removed his spectacles, his eyes weary but clear. Her fear, Superintendent? At the gathering, her reaction to the mention of a witness was stark. Her hands shook, her eyes betrayed panic. The others, they were uneasy, but she was terrified. And her husband, he knew nothing. His protectiveness was genuine, not complicity. The photograph, the clipping, her search tonight, it all pointed to Eve Rendell as Lily Gambol. Spence nodded, his respect evident. Poor Bentley, he'll be freed, thanks to you. I'll see to the paperwork. Poirot inclined his head. Justice, mon ami, is served, but the heart, it aches for the lives lost to fear and secrecy. As the parlour emptied, Poirot stood alone, the fire dying to embers. The case was solved, the killer unmasked, but the cost was heavy. He tucked the clipping into his notebook, a reminder of the past's long shadow. Tomorrow he would return to London, but tonight he would reflect on the fragility of human nature, and the truths his little grey cells had uncovered. Chapter 12. Poirot departs. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Broadhine, casting a gentle light on the village's cobbled lanes and thatched roofs, as if to cleanse the shadow of its recent tragedies. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of his room in the Three Ducks Inn, his suitcase packed, his overcoat draped neatly over a chair. The case of Mrs. McGinty's murder and that of Mrs. Upwood had been resolved. The killer unmasked as Eve Rendell, once Lily Gambol, a woman whose desperate bid to bury her past had led to 2 brutal deaths. Yet Poirot felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction tempered by the weight of human frailty. The truth, though uncovered, left scars on the village and on his own meticulous heart. He descended to the inn's parlour, where Mrs. Sweetyman, her briskness restored, was setting out a modest breakfast. Leaving us already, Monsieur Dupont, she said, her eyes curious but kind. You've stirred things up, haven't you? The village won't soon forget this. Poirot smiled, his moustache twitching slightly. I am but a visitor, madame, who seeks the truth. Broadhine, it will heal, but it must remember the cost of secrets. She nodded, her face softening. Poor Mrs. McGinty, and Mrs. Upwood too. And that Bentley lad, freed now, thanks to you. You're a clever one, sir, for all your foreign ways. Poirot inclined his head, accepting the compliment with grace. He sipped his tea, still deplorably weakened, reflected on the case. Eve Rendell's confession had laid bare the motives: fear of exposure, a past crime that haunted her, and a moment of panic that spiraled into murder. The sugar hammer, chosen to frame James Bentley, and the morphine slipped into Mrs. Upwood's coffee were the acts of a woman skilled at deception but undone by her own terror. The photograph, the clipping, the staged robbery, all were pieces of a puzzle Poirot's little grey cells had meticulously assembled. Superintendent Spence arrived as Poirot finished his breakfast, his weathered face etched with relief. "Mr. Poirot," he said, shaking his hand firmly, "you've done it again. Bentley's release is being processed, and Eve Rendell's in custody. She's not fighting, it seems almost relieved it's over." Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. The burden of guilt, it weighs heavily. mon ami. Madame Rendel, she carried it for years, and when Madame McGinty threatened to expose her, it was too much. The second murder, it was to silence Madame upwards. Suspicions. But the truth, it cannot be buried forever. Spence rubbed his jaw, his tone thoughtful. You saw through her from the start, didn't you? That business with the witness at the gathering, it was a masterstroke. Poirot's smile was modest. A small deception, superintendent, to provoke a reaction. Madame Rendel's fear betrayed her hands, her eyes, they spoke louder than words. The photograph in the album, the clipping under the floorboard, these were her undoing. She could not resist the urge to destroy them. Spence gestured to the door. Walk with me, Mr. Poirot. I'll see you to the station. As they stepped into the crisp morning air, Broadhinny seemed to stir, its residents emerging with cautious glances. Poirot noted the postmistress, Miss Birch, sweeping her doorstep, her eyes following him with curiosity. Across the green, Deirdre Henderson stood by the duck pond, her plain face sombre. Poirot paused, approaching her with a gentle bow. Mademoiselle Henderson, he said, you were brave to speak of the clipping. Your words, they helped bring justice. Deirdre's cheeks flushed, her voice low. I didn't do much, monsieur. Dupont, I wish I'd said more to Mrs. McGinty, asked what she meant. Maybe she'd still be alive. Poirot's eyes softened. Do not blame yourself, mademoiselle. The fault lies with the one who chose violence. You have a kind heart. She nodded, her eyes glistening, and turned away. Poirot rejoined Spence, his thoughts lingering on the village's quiet wounds. They passed Laburnum Cottage, now silent without Mrs. Upward's commanding presence. Robin Upward stood at the gate, his scarf a muted blue, his face drawn. Monsieur Dupont, Robin called, his voice lacking its usual flair. I hear you've solved it. Mother would have admired your flair for drama, catching the killer like that. Poirot bowed, his tone gentle. Your mother, she was a woman of spirit. Her loss is great, but her memory will endure in your work, Nen. Robin's smile was faint. I hope so. I'm shelving the murder play, though too close to home now. Safe travels, sir. At the station, the train to London waited, its steam curling into the air. Spence shook Poirot's hand again, his respect evident. You've a knack for seeing what's hidden, Mr. Poirot. If you ever tire of retirement, Kilchester could use you. Poirot chuckled, his eyes twinkling. Retirement, it is but a pause, mon ami. The little grey cells, they do not rest. But, for now, I return to London, to my tisane and my books. Broadhinny, it has taught me much about the secrets that hide in quiet places. As the train pulled away, Poirot gazed out at the receding village, its rooftops fading into the mist. The case had been a study in human nature, fear, guilt, the lengths to which one would go to protect a fragile new life. Eve Rendel, as Lily Gambol, had sought redemption but found only tragedy. James Bentley, freed from a false conviction, would rebuild, but the village would carry the scars of its losses. Poirot opened his notebook, its pages filled with neat diagrams and notes. He added a final line. The past, it is a shadow that follows, but the truth, it is the light that reveals. He closed the book, his mind already turning to the next challenge. For Hercule Poirot, the world was never short of mysteries, and his little grey cells were ever ready to meet them.